I'm going to go over the 10 most important changes in the Pathfinder Remaster that will be coming out on November 15 in the Player Core and GM Core books. This is the first of 10 videos that I plan to do over the next 2 weeks, one every weekday. It's covering the remaster. I am Ronald, the rules lawyer. I am a lawyer who also has GM'd RPGs for 13 years and also taught an after-school middle school RPG class. I've been covering mostly Pathfinder 2e, which is my favorite system, and as a content creator, I received an advanced copy of the remaster books. Consider supporting my Patreon, where you'll get early access to these videos as I make them as quickly as possible, and also exclusive access to the 3.5-hour video where people on my server and I react to the 2 books. Before I go into the top 10, I want to first say welcome to the many people who have delayed their transition or checking out of Pathfinder 2e because of the Wizards of the Coast OGL debacle at the beginning of this year, waiting for the new edition, that I've been calling it, to come out in the form of these remaster books. However, as you can see, I'll be doing an overview of these 2 books and talk about learning Pathfinder in my second video. I wanted to get this video out first because there's a lot of current Pathfinder players who are burning to hear some news from me about what has changed. But I will say first that in the grand scheme of things, while this is a new edition, it is an incremental edition. The blogs from Paizo and all the discussion online this past year have, of course, focused on what has changed. But when you take a step back, and now I've seen this, now that I've seen the 2 books, I would say 98% of the game is the same. Now, this isn't to say that there are no significant improvements that are really going to be appreciated by the community, but the fundamental core systems, the class design, the basic math, the engine, 98% of what we see here was already released to us in 2019 with the core rulebook. So on to my top 10 list. I'm going to be going from the least important to the most important. I rank things based on 2 criteria. First, how often it will come up in a typical game, and second, its deeper impact on gameplay and the design space. So on to number 13. It's not a rules lawyer video without me cheating and going over my limits. So number 13 is spell buffs, ? I've yet to go through the player core book. However, I've seen the following spell, which tells me that they did do a balance check to try to juice up some weaker spells. And that is Ray of Enfeeblement, which is now called Enfeeble to move away from the open gaming license. No attack roll is needed. That is the big change. Whereas before, you had to succeed on an attack roll and then they get a saving throw. Now there is no need to aim at the target. Now, what about spells that are seen as quite powerful compared to others of the same rank? Things like slow. Well, that hasn't changed in this case. So perhaps, and I'll see more when I do more of a deep dive into the spells, they've been working to strengthen the bottom end of the spells, but keep the upper end. Oh, by the way, synesthesia is not in the player core book, but players can still legally use it since this is not a new whole number edition. Okay, number 12 is there's a new character sheet. Well, this is not news to people who've been following the news. Well, this is the current character sheet that people can see in the core rulebook. It uses a lot of ink, and it gives an impression to people who are intimidated by what they've heard about Pathfinder 2e that it is as complicated and inscrutable and hard to learn as they thought it was. They've now replaced it with a cleaner design and is more approachable. So this is good and removes one obstacle to getting people to check out the system. Number 11 is a nerf to the hammer flail weapons group. These were the groups of weapons that when you did a critical hit and you were a martial class or somehow had access to their critical specialization effect, they would fall prone automatically. A very powerful debuff. Well, now the target has a chance to stay on their feet and do a reflex save in the case of flails and a fortitude save in the case of hammers. This is welcome as the original versions were much more powerful than the other weapon groups and discouraged diversity in weapon loadouts. Now, 2 years ago, I brought this up on the Pathfinder 2e subreddit that perhaps there should be a change to how these weapons worked. that a saving throw should be required. And as you can see, my karma for that post was only +5. There was a lot of division and not accepting what I was proposing. Well, looks like it was a good idea. Need to stretch. Number 10 is that they simplified spellcasting. How? Well, before you had to use verbal, somatic, material, or focus components to execute a spell. And those actions had traits hidden within them. Well, now the traits that affect gameplay are now listed right in the spell itself. And uniformly, when you cast spells, and now it is uniform that casting spells requires uttering incantations. So being unable to speak means you cannot cast spells, barring a character who has a disability and their player works something out with the GM. Also, for people who don't know, doing gestures in Pathfinder 2e does not require a free hand. You can have a dagger and a shield and still cast Magic Missile. You only need a free hand now to use a focus, now called a locus. And in the player core book, there are only 2 spells that require that, and they all involved having a planar key to travel between planes. So it's essentially not a thing in this game anymore, needing a free hand to cast spells, except for those situations. That means our workhorse healing spell, Heal, no longer requires a free hand to cast the 3-action version, which some of you playing Pathfinder may not have caught. You currently need a free hand because of the material component that's required in the 3-action version right now. But with the remaster, that's gone. Next, number 9 is shield runes. In Pathfinder currently, there's a dichotomy between those runes that can be really tough and that you can absorb damage with by shield blocking, and then the interesting ones that had special abilities. Now you can apply runes just as you can with weapons and armor in this game to shields and make them be tougher, including the interesting magical ones. So they're called reinforcing runes, and when you compare them to the sturdy shields that are currently in the game and which are still in the remaster, they cost slightly less than a sturdy shield of that level. I assume because it's meant to be combined and added to a magical shield that itself will have a cost. Note that it increases the shield's existing hardness and it increases its existing hit points. So there are some magical shields that have some slightly better stats than steel shields do, and this would stack with those. So yes, you can have a tough shield blocking lion's shield, a level 6 shield that lets you bite with the shield. That can be used for blocking now without fear of destroying the shield. So that's a good change. Number 8 is that they have buffed Disarm. Disarm is the athletics action that nobody uses right now, or very few use, because you had to critically succeed on it to actually have an effect. This is how it currently reads. If you only succeed and don't critically succeed, yes, future attempts to disarm get a +2 bonus, and they get a -2 penalties for their attacks. But these effects end when that creature's turn starts, so it often didn't have an effect at all. Well, the remaster now makes it last indefinitely. Both of these debuffs have no automatic end. The creature needs to do an interact action to remove them. And, as we know, interacting can provoke things like reactive strike, formerly known as attack of opportunity. So this is definitely a buff to action that needed it. And this is also something that I said needed to be changed, but I suggested something weaker than what Paizo is doing, and I approve. Number 7 is easier crafting. Crafting in the base system is maligned by many players because you need to spend 4 days and you gain no value spending 4 days to set up your crafting, then you do a check. And also its main benefit of giving you access to items that you couldn't just simply buy in your local settlement was canceled by the fact that you needed the formula to craft the item, which also is probably not available in your settlement. Well, they have made it so that you don't need a formula to craft an item that is common. The formula requirement has now been replaced with this language. The item must be common or you must otherwise have access to it. And access is gained by gaining a formula if it is uncommon or rare. Also, you need only 2 days to set up to craft, and if you have the formula for it, it only takes 1 day. So only 1 day of downtime to craft anything that is common if you have the formula. I can see what they were trying to do with the 4-day requirement before, but I think Paizo just realized many campaigns don't last months in game time, so they changed it to this. A GM can always adjust these times that they want for a longer campaign. Okay, number 6 is changing recall knowledge. I also made a video talking about buffing this action, but yeah, recall knowledge before, this is what it was before, had a few problems, actually several, and I thought it was open to an interpretation that made it too weak, and it was often too weak for many tables. We see one problem here in that in the current version, the player does a skill check regarding a topic related to that skill. So the player needed to declare which skill they were using. Of course, some skills are not applicable to some topics, especially creature types. If the player doesn't know that something is in fact not an undead creature and still uses their religion skill, well, they are SOL. Another issue was that if you critically failed, you got false information, which can feel bad for an action that already felt weak and that you spent an action on. Well, here is the remaster version. First, it says, you suggest a skill that you'd like to use and ask the GM a question. It's agnostic as to which actual skill the GM rolls behind the screen, which is one thing I advocated, that the GM should just use the most applicable skill. It also makes explicit that you and the GM can talk about what skills are appropriate for this situation. It also says you ask a question, which was unclear before. A lot of tables ran it so that when you're trying to identify a creature, it was a general inquiry about the creature. And in fact, it gives a lot of examples of what questions could be asked. The word topic before was just too general and vague. And it also countenances the player and the GM talking in advance before you commit to the skill as to what skills may be appropriate, what's a good question to ask, is the question narrow enough for the GM to want to adjudicate it, all that stuff. And also, when you critically fail, the GM has the option of simply giving you no information and does not have to give you false information. So in general, recall knowledge, I believe, has been buffed, and it is now clearer how to use it at the table, which are both good things in my opinion. Now, there's language in the GM core book about creature identification that survived the remaster that I think is not good for the game. However, I think this language in the player core book will trump that for most tables. People will prefer to use this instead, so I think it's overall good. Okay, number 5 is a change to the aid action. This is something else I also suggested should be changed in a video. They did improve it at low levels. So let's see what they did. This is what they did. Everything's the same, except that the default DC is now 15 instead of 20. So one of my issues with aid before was that at low levels, when people play the game first, in a game that really encourages teamwork and helping each other out, the aid action with its default DC of 20 before actually made it more likely you would fail and sometimes even harm the main check when you did it for the cost of an action and a reaction. It was not a good message, I thought, that should be sent to new players. However, the other issue I raised is still here and in fact exacerbated, where you get to a level under the current rules where this is an automatic critical success and you can get a +3 or +4 with no suspense at all in your aid check roll. And in a system where every +1 matters, getting an automatic +4 is gigumongous. You can be level 14 and a master in a skill and automatically critically succeed. Well, now that level is lowered to level 9. You could be a master in a skill and be level 9 and automatically critically succeed, which I don't think is good. And so I recommend tables consider Ronald's rules of aiding. I'll have a link in the video description. For some tables, actually, because I'm actually going to raise this with my tables and see what they think about trying this as written. Maybe they don't think auto-crit success at mid to high levels is that bad, given other things competing for their actions and reactions. We'll see. Okay, next. Number 4 is universal spellcasting proficiency. This is going to be important for spellcaster mains. Okay, currently wizards become trained in arcane spell attacks and arcane spell DCs. In Pathfinder, you can be trained, and you can also get better than trained at something. You can be expert, then master, and legendary. But this means that currently, the wizard is only trained in one of the 4 spell traditions. So if that wizard were ever to take an archetype in another spellcasting class, like cleric, which casts divine magic, the wizard might be level 15 and be a master in their arcane spells, but when they take that archetype for cleric, they're only trained. And it means you're much more proficient with spells from your main class than you are with your archetypes. Well, this is the change. The wizard is now just trained in spell attacks and spell DCs. They will still eventually become legendary at level 19, but if they take an archetype in cleric, they can eventually be legendary in casting cleric spells. They're still affected by how high their wisdom is, and they won't get spells of the same highest ranks that they do as wizards. So their spellcasting as a cleric is still not as good as their wizard spellcasting. They're just removing that extra barrier of making it so that your spell math was far lower, even farther lower, than your main class's spells. I think that's a good thing. And this is what I've read on the forums, and it's been confirmed by the designers. However, in Player Core, page 403, I found language is probably a legacy of the current core rulebook, where it talks about different spell proficiencies for different spells that you cast. I think that just needs to be edited out. Okay. Next is number 3. There is no more alignment. Most people watching this already know that this change has happened. So the good and evil and law and chaos axes that go as far back as 1975, I believe, are gone. You don't have any alignment at all. You're not good or evil. You're not lawful or chaotic. And there were issues with alignment. Many tables had philosophical debates on whether an action was good or a necessary evil, and whether opposing a tyrant made you not lawful. And there's also something weird about putting something that is inherently complex into boxes. And on a practical level, in a game that has spells to detect alignment, it can create problems for GMs who want to tell certain kinds of stories, like mystery stories, murder mysteries, or just having campaign worlds where morality is more gray and loyalties can shift. There's also a weird mechanic in Pathfinder 2e where you had damage that was called good, evil, lawful, or chaotic. And they could only damage a creature of the opposite alignment. It made spells like Divine Lance that did alignment damage not feel good if you cast it against a creature and discover that they are in fact not evil, they are neutral aligned. It made not being good or evil the mechanically optimal choice. And it also meant your paladin could walk into any village and cast a good aligned Divine Lance to find out who was evil. So a lot of shenanigans. Instead, when you make your character, you choose edicts and anathema, your character's beliefs, basically. And these are entirely optional. You don't have to choose them. Now, if you follow a deity, you might take inspiration from the edicts and anathema listed for them. Also, ancestries list those prevalent in their societies. And I'll show you what's listed for the dwarf. It's only these 4 lines right here. They like to create art with utility, guard their community, keep their clan dagger close, and their anathema are to leave something uncompleted or to forsake their family. A lot of players, I think, will just skip this, honestly. Like, a lot of my middle schoolers would just skip alignment or not think about it, not think of it as important. So we'll see what players do, but I can see the value of it as a occasion to think about your character. So what replaces the mechanical effects of alignment from before? Well, now you can be holy or unholy, and there can be effects that key off of whether your target is holy or unholy. So our Divine Lance spell, and I'll go into this more in a future video in this remastered coverage, some effects will do more damage to somebody if they are holy or unholy. But also they'll still do damage to those creatures, called spirit damage. And in case you're wondering, I looked for a spell to detect whether someone is holy or unholy, and I don't see one. Okay, the second most important change in the remaster is we no longer have the 8 magic schools. Abjuration, Conjuration, Divination, Enchantment, Evocation, Illusion, Necromancy, and Transmutation. Those are going the way of the dodo. Now, there are issues I had with it that I cover in a video, and I'm glad that these are going to go away. The short version is that not everything can be put in one of those 8 boxes. Where do healing spells go, for example? But also it prevented cool ideas like this, where this is what we see in the remaster. The idea of actual wizarding schools in the campaign world that have some in-world focus curriculum. Here, the School of Battle Magic has a number of spells that are useful for helping soldiers and armies. It includes many evocation spells that deal damage, but also spells like True Target that would have been divination spells that help your side target a single enemy. Now, I like the thematic change, and there's now an unlimited design space for them to make more cool schools without being constrained by 8 philosophical and metaphysical categories. However, there are 2 issues here. First, the remaster does not give guidance to a GM on how to make their own schools. One could derive how to do that from the examples given, but the idea of having more schools is not countenanced in the text. Also, because of the way wizard specialization works, where you get a bonus spell slot every spell rank that can only be filled by one of the spells in your curriculum, the fact that some of these spells don't scale well as you level up, things like Breathe Fire, which does 2d6 fire damage when you're first level, which is fine at that point, but when you're a 10th level wizard, it's not very helpful. We have 3 first rank spells that, because they must be prepared as first rank spells, don't stay useful as you become mid to high level. It becomes basically a dead slot. I would recommend that GMs and players figure out some substitute spells to avoid this problem, but that problem shouldn't be there. I think this is overall an improvement to the game, but it is just has a few rough spots. And the number one change, in my opinion, is the buff to focus spells. Focus spells are those spells that are rechargeable, that are powered by your focus point pool. It starts at 1 point and can go up to 3. In the current version of focus spells, you can essentially only cast 1 focus spell per combat, assuming you have 10 minutes to rest between those combats to get a focus point back. Even when you had a pool of 2 or 3 points, if you spent 2 points in a given battle, you can only get 1 of those back. That's because of this requirement that you had to have spent a focus point since the last time you regained any focus points. As a result, there were feats that spellcasting classes could get to get 2, even 3 focus points back between encounters. So here are feats for the cleric in the current version of the cleric, one at level 12 and one at level 18. You have to be level 18 and spend the level 18 feat in order to be able to go from 0 back to 3 focus points. Well, now in the remaster, you have this ability from the beginning. You may have a focus point pool of only 1, but there are ways to get 3 focus points by level 2, at least for some classes. So the requirement to have spent a focus point since the last time you gained focus points has just been removed. Every time you spend 10 minutes refocusing, you get a focus point back. Now, the maximum number of points in your pool is equal to the number of focus spells you know, or 3, whichever is lower. Now, for spells to increase your pool, they have to cost a focus point to cast. So that means not the Bard's Composition cantrips. Now, there still is a feat that can be gained at level 12 to allow a caster to get all of their focus points back with only 10 minutes of refocusing. Now, Paizo said the reason they were doing this was to simplify things, and many tables were already running it this way, not knowing they were breaking a rule. It is more intuitive and simpler, true, but I think they wanted to buff casters with this. And I'm not sure they're going to say this officially, but even before the recent brouhaha around casters, there's been some awareness among the designers, apparently, that casters could use a little of a boost in their power compared to marshals. I think this is one of the ways they were doing that. I think this shows that they were thinking that and that they're taking a step to do so. Now, there are some martials that have focus points also, like the champion, the ranger, and the monk, but focus spells are not really their shtick. That's not where most of their power comes from. And for the ranger and the monk, they have to spend feats to get focus spells. Its main impact is on the casters. At low levels, this is particularly significant. When a low-level caster has maybe only 3 leveled spells for the day, being able to cast their focus spell for each encounter is a significant number of, quote, spell slots that they have. And remember, focus spells scale up as they gain levels. So this means more magic all the time. This also means that there's going to be a shift in the character build meta, where there now is a premium placed on gaining focus spells, especially early in your character's level 1 to 20 career, because of the huge marginal benefit you get from a second focus point, especially. That champion who can cast Lay on Hands, if they take the champion feat that gives them a focus spell, they now have 2 Lay on Hands per combat if they want to do that, as well as more versatility with their doubled focus point pool. The champion can do that at level 1 and then take the psychic archetype and get another focus point. I don't know if I like the change to the meta, shifting the weight towards these focus point increasing choices. However, I think the net result is positive compared to the cons. But we will see. We'll see how it plays out as people start playing the remaster. Now, that obviously is the end of my list. Now for my closing statement. The Paizo developers called the remaster an errata plus, and I think that is appropriate for this. It's the same whole numbered edition, definitely. It does not feel like much has changed in the game, taking the big picture into account. I would characterize nearly all these changes as efforts to reduce complexity in the game and rigidity to make the game play more intuitively. That the things that they were removing were not adding enough to the game to justify their existence. Pathfinder 2e already having a reputation of being a crunchy game, and being a crunchy game didn't need to be crunchier and less intuitive in these particular instances, so they cleaned it up. So that's my first video in my coverage of the remaster. I have these other videos planned. Again, I plan to put one out every weekday over these next 2 weeks, so definitely like and subscribe if you want to follow my coverage. Also, meanwhile, you should join my Discord where we talk about Pathfinder 2e and people play Pathfinder 2e in the drop-in organized play system we have. Also, I interact with the Discord all the time. And also support my Patreon, which lets me continue this channel, and you also get early access to my videos, including these videos on the remaster that I'm working on, and exclusive access to certain videos, including my 3.5-hour video where me and other members of my Discord go through the player core and GM core books. So that's it. I hope you enjoyed the video. I've been Ronald, the Rules Lawyer, and I'll see you next time.